a growing number of people are becoming increasingly concerned about the way big data, the Silicon Valley corporations that rule the internet or seem to rule the internet, are increasingly taking over more and more aspects of our lives, including usurping functions that we normally think of as belonging to governments. I have been following this issue and writing about it for some time, and one of the thinkers I've relied on most in this area is about to join us now. Frank Pasquale has been on the program before to discuss his book, The Black Box Society, The Secret Algorithms That Control Money and Information. He is an attorney. He is professor of law at the University of Maryland. He's an affiliate fellow at Yale Law School's Information Society Project. He's a member of the Council for Big Data Ethics and Society, which is something actually I don't know about. I'd like to know more about, and he is the author of what I think is an important new paper entitled From Territorial to Functional Sovereignty, The Case of Amazon. He joins us now. So first of all, Frank, thanks for coming back on the program.
Oh, thank you, RJ. It's terrific to be back.
Well, it's great to have you back. And again, as I said in the introduction, I think this is an important paper, perhaps better than my taking the risk of summarizing it for you. If you would just give us a brief sense or abstract of what you have to say here.
Sure. So one of the things that I've been watching closely is the rise of these arbitration clauses, where if you get in trouble or if you have a dispute with a company and say they cheated you out of something, they make you sign an arbitration clause, and it says, you can't go to court against them, or if you file a complaint, you've got to go to an arbitrator, things like that. And I think that's very troubling. But what I'm seeing now is something that I think is even worse than these arbitration clauses, which is that giant digital platforms, and I focus on Amazon, they are actually not just parties to litigation, but they're deciding it. So we have the corporation as our courthouse. And that's what I think is a real problem that we're running into. And, it extends in all sorts of directions, but I wanted to start there because, it just happens that as the state can do less and less to help consumers, as, we have this attack on consumer protection, the highest levels of the federal government now, people are just saying, boy, I'm not going to even try to use the courts. I'm just going to go to Amazon and buy everything on Amazon. So if I get in a dispute, they're going to decide the dispute.
Yeah, well, I want to walk through a couple examples of that with you, or help us understand how that would work. But I also think that it's important to highlight the phrase "the corporation as courthouse." I think that's a great phrase, Frank, and I think the increasing ability of these corporations to adjudicate matters that I would say would need to be in the public sphere. But give us, and we could also go on to talk about YouTube, Google, and so on. But let's start with Amazon. How does Amazon function as a corporate courthouse in this case?
So imagine if you get in a dispute with a seller, and a lot of people don't realize that Amazon is not just sort of trying to sell things that it itself is buying or making, etc., that they're a big third-party marketplace. And you might order something from a seller, and it might not be the right color, or it might say that it's extra large, and in fact it's medium, or there's all sorts of disputes that can happen. And then they might say, no, we did send you the right thing. And then the question is, whose word counts? And so you have the situation where Amazon has to decide, or they have some very opaque processes. And I've worked on this. I toyed with this myself, in terms of if you get in a dispute like this, can you ever talk to a person? I've never been able to do that. I've sometimes had some emails from some random person come back and forth, but there certainly is no way to talk to anybody. And so you run into this sort of problem where people rationally might think, if I get in a dispute, I want to be a really valuable customer, so they take my side. So people might buy more and more stuff on Amazon or sell more and more stuff on Amazon so that they are sort of, they contribute more to its revenues. And I think that, this dynamic, as it plays out, that the revenues from both us as buyers or sellers on Amazon are like taxes that you pay to a government. And it's like Amazon is sort of governing this realm of commerce in a way. And that is, to me, very scary because, there's a lot of, even though the government can do wrong or can get things wrong when it decides disputes, at least there's some forms of accountability. But with respect to Amazon, it's very hard to figure out exactly who you can appeal to, if they decide against you.
Well, absolutely. And I guess the question, I would say there are multiple issues here, and you addressed some of them, but, yes, the right of appeal, who you would appeal to, even, I suppose, in some sense, the right to know your accuser or your opponent in the hearing. As you say, sometimes it's just faceless people. Candidly, I've had instances of a dispute with a seller on Amazon where Amazon has ruled in my favor, if you will, but I've been a little uncomfortable because I've thought, well, wait a minute, but they shouldn't cave that easily. Doesn't the other person get to challenge me? Where something was sent to the wrong address or whatever. And oh, no, we've refunded you 100%. It's like, but I didn't hear what the other guys had to say. Maybe I gave them the wrong address. So I am also troubled by this, and I appreciated your papers giving a name to this thing that has sort of been troubling me subconsciously for a while. But I guess somebody might ask, so what? Let's say that Amazon is usurping the role of small claims court or whatever. Maybe they can disrupt the court process. Maybe they can do it faster, cheaper, better. What would we say to that?
Those are great complaints, and I would be more sympathetic to those complaints if it weren't for the fact that very large corporations have spent the past several decades corroding the court system, paying less taxes, doing tort reform, so-called tort reform, pushing these types of clauses in contracts where you sign away your right to sue, pushing state legislatures to reduce your ability to get real recoveries, destroying class actions. So I think we've got to understand this all together. We've got to say, okay, maybe, they're like the fire department trying to put out the fire of cheating by large corporations or corporations in general, versus consumers, but on the other hand, they're also the arsonists as well. So before I give them credit for being the firefighter, I'd also say they've been an arsonist in many respects, and we got to have an accounting of that.
Yeah, tort reform is another one of those phrases where people seem to think reform is a synonym for dismantling. Social Security reform comes to mind as another. But so let's see, how have they done this dismantling of the court system? First of all, as you just pointed out, they don't pay their taxes. In fact, Amazon's meteoric growth is in significant part attributable to the tax advantages it had for the first number of years of its existence. They underpay taxes. Of course, they exploit at no charge a publicly created resource, which is the internet itself. And then there's the matter that you mentioned earlier of the fact that people are forced to waive their rights to go to court, their rights to class action suits, and so on, in favor of arbitration that heavily favors the corporation when they use these products. And the answer you usually hear from the corporations is, well, don't use it if you don't like our contract provisions. But there's really no alternative to using it, is there?
No, there really isn't. I mean, the problem that I think happens here is I always get this pushback where people say, I just went to a conference on antitrust yesterday. I was just speaking on this yesterday on large digital platforms and antitrust. And someone came up to me afterwards and said, I don't need to use Amazon. I can go and buy whatever I want online. I'll be fine. And my response to that is, sure, you may invest that effort and you may have the time and ability to do that. But you should also realize you have a loss here as well, that over time you have developed this cooperative relationship with Amazon where you've given them a ton of data, they've given you some discounts and, negotiated in your favor versus sellers, et cetera. But it's a cooperative relationship, and ultimately when in the past, when people have developed these types of relationships with large companies that are infrastructural, like railroads or telecoms or electric companies, the government has said, wow, these companies got so powerful, we've got to put some rules on them so they can't exploit that power, that relationship that they have with their customers. And that's what we have to start thinking about now. We have to stop thinking, oh, well, you could opt out, because for a lot of people, the effort involved in opting out is just not worth it. I give the example, in the paper on how, yes, I could get mad at Amazon at some point, because I've noticed recently that, in trying to buy something, they will always throw up like Prime Pantry instead of Prime. They're trying to push you to basically substitute your grocery shopping with them. And yeah, I could get annoyed by that and go somewhere else, but ultimately that going somewhere else is going to involve a lot of learning a new interface, entering in my credit card number. They don't know my past orders. They don't know, there's so many ways in which it is just so easy. And that ease, that's what government exists. That's one of the things government exists to combat, is situations where one entity has a huge power advantage and they misuse it.
One of the analogies that comes to mind, because I was thinking as you were talking, Frank Pasquale, that sometimes you don't realize what you're giving away until you need it. When there is a dispute, when there is a conflict of some kind, and by then it's too late. It struck me that in economic history there was another sort of retailer who offered great convenience to the people who used it. And the people using it didn't realize until it was too late what they were giving away. And that was the company store that mining towns used to offer. It's right there in town. You can buy against your paycheck. We'll give you automatic credit. And of course, people, in the words of the old song, wound up finding that they'd sold their soul to the company store. So.
Yes.
I'm afraid that's what we're up against here. And before we, since this concept of functional sovereignty is I think is so important, before I let you go, I do also want to mention that we had on the show last week a progressive internet broadcaster, David Pakman, and I brought him on because he was an example of what we're seeing in the YouTube, Google world, which is people now, many people derive income from what they publish on YouTube, and YouTube suddenly decided to stop allowing them to make income out of any content that they deemed controversial. We found it here on this program because we put our videos up on YouTube, that all of a sudden anything that he addressed, even from a incontrovertible constitutional position, controversial topics, suddenly they were quote unquote demonetized. Now, we don't make a lot of money for this program off YouTube. I did think about symbolically suing them for $30 or something. But what really concerned me about it was the notion that here you had a private corporation abrogating the rights of small presses, if you will, or modern analog of small presses, to earn a living offering discussion of topics they determined should not be discussed. That I found deeply troubling. And your thoughts on that?
I completely agree with you 100%. I mean, my book, The Black Box Society, 3 years ago was talking about some initial moves in this direction by YouTube, and I criticized them then. And what amazes me is that they, rather than reforming their ways, they have become more arbitrary, I believe, and more acting in more troubling ways to abuse their power and to sort of demonetize somebody like David Pakman or other channels, like if they were doing it to you, et cetera. That is just it astonishes me. And I think they might try to frame it as, well, advertisers may not want to advertise against certain, controversial political topics, etc. But even if they put it that way, there are many ways in which you can do a subtler thing. You can do it in a subtle way. If you really credit advertisers as having preferences on that deep a level for the content, which the whole business model, obviously, of Google and YouTube is not to advertise against content, but advertise against audiences. So that doesn't really make much sense.
Well,
So
they,
ultimately, I think that they have got to be brought to heel on this matters.
yeah.
And one of the things that I brought up yesterday at the antitrust conference was, with the Affordable Care Act, insurers cannot keep more than 15 or 10% or 15 or 20% of their premiums. They've got to pass those premiums on to the healthcare providers, the doctors, the hospitals, et cetera, that actually provide care. And I think something like YouTube, it's just a sheer intermediary. It does less than the insurers do, probably. And so there should be some rules that, it has to, first of all, it has to provide monetization opportunities. And then secondly, that, it has to pass on a certain percentage of that to the advertisements to the people online.
Well,
So, yeah, I hope that there is some action taken there, and I don't think this administration will do much, but hopefully people in Europe, Canada, South America, around the world are listening and are going to put forward fairer rules, and then eventually that'll come to the U.S.
yes, and I think that Google did explain its actions by saying that advertisers don't want to advertise about controversial subjects, but whatever their motivation, whether it's that or whether it's Google itself as a search engine suppressing certain political publications because it says it wants to prevent Russia from hacking our political process or whatever it is, it's deeply disturbing to me when corporations have that power, number one, and when they abuse, in my opinion, abuse that power, and yours too, I guess, abuse that power in such high-handed ways. And I think it should disturb every citizen of a sovereign nation. So, Frank Pasquale, as always, thanks for writing the great book, Black Box Society. Thanks for this important paper on functional sovereignty, which is a one way of saying they're acting like nations now, governing us, if you will. And thanks for coming on the program.